In this video, we're going to discuss the English language requirement as it relates to UK fiance visas. Also, if you're considering applying for a UK proposed civil partnership visa, since the immigration rules are identical in all but name, this video will also be helpful to you. As an OISC-regulated UK immigration law firm specialising in UK partner visas, we are very well placed to discuss this. There are numerous ways that you can satisfy the English language requirement. We will now discuss each of them in turn. The first way to satisfy the English language requirement is for the applicant to be a national of a majority English-speaking country. If an applicant holds any of these nationalities, the only thing that you'll have to do is to submit their passport which shows this. The second way to satisfy the English language requirement is to have an academic undergraduate, master's or PhD awarded by an educational institution in the UK. In such a case, all you will need to do is to submit the degree certificate, which shows 1. The applicant's name, 2. The date and title of the award, and 3. The name of the awarding institution. The third way is for the applicant to be aged 65 or over when the application is submitted, in which case simply submitting the applicant's passport will satisfy the UK fiance visa English language requirement. So we have discussed the 3 easiest ways to satisfy the English language requirement. The other ways, unfortunately, involve some effort on your behalf, as we'll now discuss. The fourth way relates to applicants awarded an English taught academic undergraduate, master's or PhD degree outside the UK. Unlike academic qualifications awarded from inside the UK, English taught academic qualifications awarded outside the UK will need to be accompanied by documentation from ECTIS, which was previously known as UK NARIC. The documentation that you'll have to get from ECTIS depends on the country in which the qualification was awarded. If the qualification was awarded in one of the countries listed here, you will only need to obtain ECTIS documentation confirming that the qualification meets or exceeds the recognised standards of a bachelor's, master's or PhD in the UK. You will not need to obtain documentation from ECTIS that the qualification was taught or researched in English at or above the required level, because it would be assumed that this was the case. If the qualification was not awarded in one of these countries, however, the documentation required from ECTIS will be slightly different. You will need to provide 1. Documentation from ECTIS which confirms that the qualification meets or exceeds the recognised standards of a bachelor's, master's or PhD in the UK. And 2. Documentation from ECTIS which confirms the degree was taught or researched in English at or above CEFR A1 level. You will note that the list of countries here is almost identical to the majority English-speaking countries list, except that Canada is not on the list here. Partners can also sit a secure English language test, otherwise known as a SELT, to satisfy the fiancé visa English language requirement. Since you only need to satisfy the English language requirement via one of the numerous ways we've discussed, this is not required if the applicant has a majority English-speaking nationality, will be aged 65 or over when the online application is submitted, or already holds an undergraduate, master's or PhD degree awarded from inside the UK. However, applicants who have been awarded an English taught undergraduate, master's or PhD from an educational institution outside the UK may prefer to sit a secure English language test, as partners often find this less tedious than going through the ECTIS process. There are a few things to cover here. Firstly, a secure English language test and an English language test is not necessarily the same thing. The Home Office have specifically created secure English language tests because there was some controversy some years back when applicants took English language tests at dodgy English language test centres. So a secure English language test is an English language test that has been specifically approved by the Home Office and is one which is taken at a Home Office approved test centre. Here is the list of the secure English language tests. Most commonly, we tend to recommend to fiancé visa applicants that they sit an IELTS life skills test. Not only can a lot of IELTS life skills test guides be found online and in local bookstores worldwide, but all IELTS life skills tests are taken at Home Office approved test centres. The reason why we do not generally recommend the IELTS for UK VI tests, which essentially comprises of the IELTS for UK academic and IELTS for UK VI general training tests, is because of 2 reasons. Firstly, the fiancé and subsequent partner visas only require you to pass an English language test in speaking and listening. However, the IELTS for UK VI tests also assess reading and writing, which is not required. Secondly, the IELTS for UK VI tests are offered at both Home Office approved test centres, as well as test centres which are not specifically approved by the Home Office for the purpose of your UK fiancé visa application. For example, here is an IELTS general training test certificate for a test taken at a Home Office approved test centre. This is fine to rely on since it contains a UK VI number. And here is an IELTS academic test certificate for a test which was not taken at a Home Office approved test centre. Unlike the certificate on the left, this does not contain a UK VI number and therefore cannot be relied on in the Fiance visa application. Another thing worth considering at this stage is the minimum level of secure English language test required. So the standard route to indefinite leave to remain is a UK Fiance visa application, where a 6-month visa will be granted. A minimum level of A1 test is required here, and then the first FLRM application, which is basically just a spouse visa application from inside the UK. 30 months permission to stay in the UK will normally be granted here. If you sit a test which is A1 level or above, you will be able to reuse the same test relied on for the Fiance visa application. You will not need to take another test. The next application will be the second FLRM application, aka a spouse visa extension, where another 30 months permission to stay will be granted. To satisfy the English language requirement here via the secure English language test route, the applicant will need to submit a test which is A2 level or above. So secure English language tests are valid for 2 years. However, if you successfully relied on a secure English language test in the previous application and submit the correct application before the visa expires, partners can ordinarily rely on the same English language test result. So, if the applicant sits an A2 level secure English language test for their Fiance visa application, they will normally be able to reuse the same test to satisfy the English language requirement for the second FLRM application. The next application will ordinarily be the indefinite leave to remain application, using the SELT application form. To satisfy the English language requirement here via the secure English language test route, the applicant will need to submit a SELT which is B1 level or above. Again, it is ordinarily the case that a secure English language test certificate can be reused. So if the applicant sits a B1 secure English language test for their Fiance visa application, they will ordinarily be able to rely on that same test certificate for the indefinite leave to remain application, as well as the British citizenship application, otherwise referred to as the British naturalisation application, which only some applicants choose to apply for. There are 2 final points worth discussing concerning secure English language tests. A good resource to find out if an applicant's English language ability in speaking and listening is good enough to pass the A1, A2 or B1 English language test is YouTube. And then finally, if you book a secure English language test, please make sure that you book it on the official website. There is a surprising amount of dodgy third-party websites that try to make you believe that they are the official website, but instead charge you an additional fee for them to book the English language test for you. There are also 2 English language requirement exemptions for Fiance visas. In other words, where one of the following applies, the applicant will not be required to satisfy the Fiance visa English language requirement. The first exemption is the disability exemption. The disability exemption will apply if the Home Office caseworker considers the applicant to have a disability, a physical or mental condition, which prevents them from either learning English or taking an approved secure English language test at the required level. Where an applicant claims to be exempt from the English language requirement, a senior Home Office caseworker or entry clearance manager will ordinarily have to agree that the exemption should apply. There are no blanket exemptions. With this being said, if the applicant is deaf, is a person without speech, or has a speech impediment which limits their ability to communicate in English, the exemption will likely be granted. The second exemption is the exceptional circumstances exemption. This applies only if the Home Office caseworker agrees that there's exceptional circumstances that prevents the applicant from meeting the requirement. Most commonly, this exemption is inquired about when there are no Home Office approved English language test centres in the applicant's country of residence. Where there are no Home Office approved English language test centres in the applicant's country of residence, the Home Office guidance states that it generally expects applicants in such a situation to travel to another country to take the test. This exemption will only apply if applicants can show, by submitting supporting evidence and providing a detailed explanation, that it is not practical or reasonable for them to travel to another country to take the test. Partners, however, will ordinarily have to show more than inconvenience or reluctance to travel overseas, such as where the visa requirements make it very difficult for the applicant to travel overseas. The English language requirement is one of the many mandatory requirements that you must meet when you apply for a UK Fiance visa. For a detailed account of all of the Fiance visa requirements, feel free to watch our incredibly in-depth Fiance visa requirements YouTube video. Also, if you found this video helpful, feel free to let us know in the comments by liking the video and by subscribing.